Right then, let's go to the old workhouse in Bullcamp, Blythburgh. The place I used to live. About 45 years ago, my mother used to be a supervisor in the hospital here. And she got the house with the job. See, it's got a lovely entrance into it. It was a workhouse in the early days, and the NHS took it over and ran it as a geriatric hospital, and now it's a residential private homes for some lucky people, I would say. So through the archway on the right hand side is where the porters used to have their office, and straight ahead of me with that white door on the end of the building and the scaffolding, that used to be the laundry. And this house, although it's now double the size of what it was when we lived here, was where we lived. The main building is in a H shape. So there's a courtyard in the middle here, and then there's a courtyard behind. And a fella called Jimmy Napfine used to look after all the gardens around here, and he actually had a couple of old inmates from the workhouse days working for him, and I did meet them as a young boy, but they didn't talk a lot, but they knew about growing plants and vegetables and what have you. And the soil around here, it was all hand dug, all in the fields around us. It used to supply the workhouse, and I'll tell you now that you wouldn't wish for better soil. It was so, you could just put your hand in it and it would just sift through your hand if you dug a hole in the ground. So we'll go around the back. Obviously that was our garden there. There's new people all over the place here now. But when we lived here there was only a young couple who lived at the back. He was a nurse. This little driveway here wasn't here when we lived here. And the hedge just went straight across here. Right in front of us, behind that black car, is where the kitchens were for the hospital, and there is a little driveway sort of where that car is, which is what we used to use to walk to get around the hospital. But all this land here, all the way up to the fence here, all the way back there, that's actually a pauper's graveyard from the workhouse days. There was never any markings for anybody who was buried here. But obviously I knew all about it because 45 years ago, it wasn't that long since the workhouse was a workhouse. So there was people who worked in the hospital, both outside on the grounds and inside as cleaners and what have you. Some of them worked for my mother, who was the cleaning supervisor here, and they'd actually lived in this as a workhouse. Never really, you know, spent all their life here really. Anyway, we'll go around the back. So I was trying to work out how long I actually lived here. I think I was about 11 or 12 when we moved here, and we didn't move away till I was 17. So in the distance there on the left hand side is two properties. Now the white property, there was a family living in there, and I don't even think they had electric. But they were, I actually went to school with the granddaughters of that family, and they were lovely people, all of them, and it was a treat for me to jump in their old van, which I think was a little old Renault. It was falling to bits. You know, it's 20 miles an hour on the main roads, you know. And once a week they used to go to Rentham or Kessingland, I'm not sure which, because that was the nearest fish and chip shop from here, so I reckon that must have been a good 10 mile away from here. But that was a real treat, jumping in the back of their van and going out with them. And we used to go out for walks. I used to go out for walks with them, you know, around this land. Now since I've come down here, I've met Simon, an old school friend, and he said that that one of them houses, I don't think it's the white one, I think it must be the one behind, was actually a place that inmates used to go to before they ever got in the workhouse, and they used to call it the plague house. Now I'd never heard of that until this week when Simon told me about it. But it obviously wasn't a plague house when I was here, but I can well believe it. I'll go a bit further. You used to be able to drive right round the whole hospital, but it looks like it's been cordoned off now. So this section here where the hedge is and along the building, that would be the old road. Now this building here is where the other family lived that I was telling you about, and they were a young family. And he was from Sri Lanka. And he was the first guy. I mean, look at that, that's beautiful. So now we're the other side of that building, when we came up the driveway. And as I say, this is another courtyard, but this was, you couldn't park here before. This was just purely gardens with a little sort of circular road in it, which I used to pretend it was my racetrack on my push bike. So this building here right in front of us was where Tim and Sandra lived, a very young couple. He was a nurse at the hospital. Sandra had two young children. Sarita was one of them. I can't remember the little boy's name, but they were very, very young, if not babies, you know. And I often wondered what happened to Tim, because I think they left when we left in 1978. And I did do a bit of research to try and track him down, and it turns out he died. And he was working offshore, and he was on some rig in the North Sea. He was living in Scotland, I believe, and whether he's still with Sandra, I don't know. But nevertheless, he'll have still been in touch with the children regardless. And he got on the helicopter. He was a chef on the rig, would you believe? Gone from nursing to being a chef. And then he got on the helicopter from the rig to Shetland Island, and then from Shetland Island they were getting on a plane, and unfortunately that plane never took off, never left the land. And it turned out that the pilot hadn't done all his checks, and I forget what they call them, the elevators, you know, the bit that flips up to get them in the air on wings, they were in a lock position. So they basically took off, you know, set off to take off, and realised that they couldn't leave the ground, and they just went straight into the water. Now the photos that I've got, which I'll show when I get home, I'll get the photo clippings out. You can see that the plane is halfway in the sea, half sticking out, and 17 people died that day, including my good friend Tim. And they were good friends to me. They he used to play football. Like I said, he was the first person to ever make me a curry. Maybe that's been my downfall, but yeah, it's you know, happy days, and what a sad end to a lovely fella. But I haven't forgotten him, I'll tell you that now. As I say, you could normally drive right round in my day. That Mum turned this hospital around. When she got the job, it was in dire straits cleaning wise. They had cockroaches, wildcats, rats, and as you can imagine, it was quite a hard place to keep clean. But she, unusually in them days for a married woman with 3 children, at 40-odd-year-old, she decided to go to college, and she got well qualified in the end, and that's how she ended up with this hospital. And this building here, I can't remember it, but there was a building here, and as far as I know, it was a big garage where the porters used to keep their van, minibus, come ambulance. And the reason they had such a thing was because this place is so far away, so remote from anywhere, that they actually used to go and pick the nurses up and drop them off. And at the end of the white building over there, I hope you can see it on the camera, it's on my chest. So there's a little alleyway, and on the right hand side was the engineer's office, and a guy called Lenny Summerfield, who was legendary in these parts, and a lovely guy, very dry sense of humour, but didn't have a bad bone in him. And he loved my mum and dad, and he probably loved me too, and looked after us. Anyway, I'll turn the video off now, and we'll head off to Halesworth, and I'll put it back on there. Halesworth is where I went to school. Wenniston as well, actually. We'll go to Wenniston first. So we're in Wenniston, and this is where I went to primary school, and this is it. So Simon's mother used to be one of the chefs here, and at the hospital, Jimmy Knapfine, who ran the garden, who did the gardens, his wife, first wife I should say, she worked here as well. Jimmy married again when his first wife died. But yeah, I think you know, they were good days. This is where I met Stevie Carnham and others, you know. And I used to come to Wenniston on my push bike, mainly to see Stevie Carnham and basically cause havoc. village hall, which was brand new when I moved here, when I lived here. And a guy called Malcolm Cliff who used to do discos, Malcolm Cliff discos. And you might think, oh yeah, country bumpkin, small little outfit. But I'll tell you what, he used to fill this place, 300 people in here, every time he put a disco up. And they were good times. He was a good DJ. And I did a bit of roadieing for him when I was at school, and eventually worked for his father at Aylesworth, John Cliff, and it was Cliff's Timber Yard. I actually was working there before I left school. It was lovely. The local vicar was married to a teacher at my school at Wenneston. Very strict lady. So the post office here on the left is where we used to get the bus. When we eventually started going to Aylesworth Middle School, and also we'd stand outside these windows here, and the old postmaster used to be standing every morning behind the window, ready to tap on the window and chase us if we leaned against them. I think he was frightened they were going to break and kill us. Yeah, happy days, happy days. Got some good memories from Aylesworth and Wenneston. Some lads moving into this cottage here on the right. I was always frightened to death of them. They had come from Manchester and they were, to me, a little bit rough, but they weren't really, they were good friends in the end. But first impressions and all that, I was petrified of them. I think it was the northern accent more than anything. Even though I'm from up north, accent can be pretty rough, especially when you're used to the soft-spoken Suffolk dialect. This pub at the end of the road here was not very busy in my day. There was a young fellow about 35 years old, I would say. He ran it, lived in it, and I dare say he was struggling. He wasn't that busy in this place. And I'll just lean forward, I'm not sure because of the angle of the bike whether you can get it, but there used to be a garage over there and he used to keep an old MG in it, open top, sort of from the wartime. And of course with me living sort of in Bullcamp, which is half a mile away, maybe it's a mile maximum, I of course when I got my moped started coming in here, made him a few quid in the end. And the back room used to be full of people that were underaged. So we'll move on to Aylesworth now. To let me keep the bike in one of his sheds here, and I used to stand on a morning waiting for the bus, and he used to have these Fiat, loads of them, Fiat tractors, which I'd never seen before. Employees from, I mean, I don't know whether they were students or what, and it was hay time, you know, when they're cutting us hay, but I think they were contractors, and he used to They used to come out, like literally 20 of them, I would say, at least 20 tractors coming out, and they're all flying around flat out everywhere. But yeah, it used to amaze me how many there was, and I never knew anybody who worked on them, you know. So they were definitely out of town, probably students just earning money in the summer. Anyway, we'll turn this off now and I'll put it back on later. So we moved to Fersfield in 1970, and this was the first school I went to, Fersfield Primary. This is in Norfolk. So we're doing it back to front actually, because obviously I was at Southwold and Blythburgh after this school, Wenniston. But anyway, yeah, this is it. So this is where it all started for me, being in East Anglia. So this is Fersfield, and this is the farm we used to get our milk from, straight from the cow. So that road takes you up to Southwold towards my uncle's place, and just along here is our place on the left. And if you keep travelling down here, you'll come to the airfield, which I can only describe as the, if you want to think what it was like in 1970, because most of the buildings were still there. But the film 12 O'Clock High with Gregory Peck definitely reminds me of the aerodrome that I remember in 1970. This is Blythburgh Church, which is just about opposite our house. Yeah, lovely place. So this is where we used to live, just here. Lovely. We never actually got to live in the house. It took me mum and dad 3 years to get planning permission, so we ended up living in Blythburgh instead, but it looks nice now. So during the war, this was an American air base, and Joe Kennedy, JFK's older brother, was based here. And there's the original hangar, and this one on the left's a newer one. There's a few Nissan huts behind, down there. Joe Kennedy died on a secret mission. They loaded the first remote control plane full of explosives, and Joe Kennedy took it up, and fortunately, after taking off from here, it blew up over Blythburgh, which is the second place we lived. So that's the ironic thing for me. But it was a secret and nobody knew anything. And while I lived here, I didn't know anything about it. Well, obviously, it was a secret of war at the time. And yeah, this was a place that my brother Roger used to bring me to learn me how to drive all around the airfield. You were allowed to drive around then, no problem, but the runways are now sort of half the size in width, and they look like a road more than a runway. But the original aerodrome had like we designed in a depicting the letter A, capital A. So they had the three runways, I think. But yeah, a wonderful place. I mean, the tower was here in 1970. You know, you could get a real feel for what the place was like during the war. Americans coming back to see if they could find the place, and as a schoolboy riding around on my push bike, I very often got asked for directions. by these strange men from America. But as I said earlier, if you want to get what's the word I'm looking for, a description of the place or what it was like for me, even in 1970, if you watch the film 12 O'Clock High with Gregory Peck, that is pretty much what it was like here. And you could almost say it was this place, but it wasn't. But yeah, very good film, and I enjoy it because it's sort of nostalgic for me to watch it, even though I wasn't alive in the war. But when I was a boy, people were still talking about the war, so it was easy as a young child to have these sort of memories of it, you know. Anyway, I'll get back on the bike and I'll put the GoPro on and I'll show you the village. It's just one street, would you believe? When we arrived in 1970, there was a couple of people rebuilding houses, one of them being a pub, and I don't know whether we'll see the actual door of this pub, and it was a pub when we arrived, and this family took it over to put it into a house, but I don't think the door's more than 4.5 foot high. But we'll see if we can see it on the GoPro when we go past. So I'm guessing that building there on the left hand side was something to do with the airfield. There are buildings sort of scattered around the area, but what they are or what they were used for, I'm not quite sure. You know, obviously the farmer has took the place over and it's no longer an airfield. However, the sign on the junction at the end of this road still says Airfield. Just my imagination just ran wild when I was a kid here. You know, Airfield Road was the sign. I think you should see that on the GoPro. Just set that Airfield. So called the street. Simple as that. Just goes through the whole of Fersfield. Some beautiful thatched houses. Oh, these houses are here. This one on the left. That used to be a shop and post office. And I remember the owners had loads of old cars in the back. And I'm talking Austin Cambridges, you know, things like that. This is the pub with the small door that got changed into a house. And yeah, it's sort of. Local pig farm when we lived here. And obviously our house, which used to be a school hall, was hidden behind the hedge actually, but yeah, that's the entrance just there. This hedge is the rectory, which you can't see. So we're heading out to Southwold now. And this is where, slow down so you can hear me. This is where my auntie used to live. She married a guy called George Beckford. They moved down here in 1950. But Auntie Mary was my dad's sister, older sister by about 8 years, and she was everybody's favourite auntie. And I have 3 cousins that live down here, and they're still in the area. They're all doing well. These houses on the left here, there used to be a crash damaged garage, you know, like it's got their logo was "You bend 'em, we mend 'em." And one of my cousins married Colin, who was a partner in the business, and yeah, we were sort of surrounded by family really. Even though we'd moved from the northeast down here. Turn right. If I turn left, this, right, Thetford. But we're just coming in to the outskirts of Southwold. And this is where George Bedford had his farm. And in later years, he was selling antiques. London, Silvertown in London, apparently. His sister moved here, and she, with a guy called Charlie, ran this pub. And I can tell you now, there was a lot of laughs in this pub. I'll just see if I can get off the bike and show you the pub. Show you, I think you'll be able to see it there. But yeah, Charlie was a huge man, big tall guy, and we used to say when he had too much to drink, it was only his big feet that stopped him from falling over. But you know, I'm making it's all sounding very rosy really, isn't it? But the truth is, you know, they certainly had their ups and downs. Money worries, no more than we do, you know that. Yeah. So we'll go down to the farm now. And my cousin moved out. Last year, I think it was, and that's 19, 24, 25, and the big Bedford's here from 1950. So the original farmhouse is just coming up on the right hand side behind that hedge with the flint. That's my cousin's old house, which is still empty apparently. People who bought it never moved in, and the farm it's up that drive, was up that drive, and the barn was on the right here, and that's where my dad used to bring the antiques down from the northeast, and my uncle George would sell them to mostly Americans who were on the various air bases in the area. And that's it. And that's the end of This Is Your Life.